Stu Systems and Mauro Annunziato, Coordinator, EU Smart City Project. So, Michele, energy grids are a strong part of a city, of course. Maybe smart, maybe not, but they are in the city. So can you tell us the role of innovation in energy grid, please?
Okay, well, maybe I'll take you through a little bit of a story first. First of all, thank you, Canada, for hosting this. I am one of those immigrants to Canada, having left Northern Ireland, so 30 years in Canada. So proud Canadian and EU citizen now living in Madrid. The heading of this topic is public-private partnerships, and we had a bit of a discussion last night around what that actually meant. So I'm going to give you my definition of what it means and take you a little bit on a journey to get to sort of the question that was asked. Public for me, so I work for a technology provider today, but my prior life was what I call being on the other side of the fence, the big divide. And one of my roles was with BC Hydro, so the utility that provides 90% of the energy to British Columbia. And I would define that as being the public part of a public-private partnership. Being on the technology provider side, I would define that as being the private. And I have some views around what those partnerships should look like, having taken a long journey on both sides. My role in BC Hydro was a leader responsible for the smart metering initiative 10 plus years ago. And one of my first jobs was to develop a business case for the province of British Columbia to define a return on investment in a business case that made sense for British Columbia. And that was no small undertaking back then because smart metering and smart grids were somewhat of ideas as opposed to actually working. And we actually looked towards Italy at that time, who had progressed further down that path than we were, to look for ideas and understanding around the technology part of it. My boss, the CEO, said to me, Michele, stop. He says, what we need to look at is what is the benefit to our citizens of British Columbia. So stop thinking technology and start to think about the benefits that we need to provide to our citizens, our customers. And so we started to focus on, what are those benefits? And one of the biggest ones that we need to focus on, and we've all taken this path since then, is how do we provide knowledge and control to our citizens around their energy use? Because up until then, we were just like every other utility, historical utility, where I, as a consumer of energy, knew nothing about that. So really the focus was, how do we provide that knowledge and information? How do we provide control into the hands of the citizens? And we talked about technology in the context of information, in the context of putting in-home devices, putting portals in place, and providing real-time information into the customer's hands. Along with that, then we got into the discussions around technology, around the grid, around what we called automating the grid. And automating the grid is sort of a funny term because it didn't mean ripping out all the lines and wires. It meant putting technology on the grid. So the grids today are still old and archaic. It's the technology that gets put on those grids that starts to provide information around what's going on in the grids, and the smart meters that are providing information of what's going on between the home and the grids and between the businesses and the grids. So we focused on not the technology again, but the reliability and the efficiency, and also the protection of the grid with respect to our citizens. So what has that got again to do with the customers? Well, ultimately, how do we get to a place where our customers not only have control within the energy use of their home, but when our customers want to actually start using clean energy, whether it's solar panels, even wind, how do they then start to feed on and off the grid? Well, in order to be able to do that, you do need technology. You can't do that without technology. But you need to use technology responsibly when you go down this path. And this is where I get into the partnership between the private and the public. So, you know, I do come from the technology end of the business, and of course, you know, we love to get excited about technology. And, you know, I've heard, IBM being used there, Siemens, etc. And yes, on the technology side, sometimes the drivers are different. And this is where I have very strong beliefs that those drivers should not be different. They should be in partnership. And we heard about trust in the last session. Because we can lose our way. Even I, because my life before going on to the provider side was as a CIO, so being on the IT side. And you can lose your way. You can start to only think about technology and forget about the reason why you exist and what you're there for. So it is really important that this public-private partnership gets addressed. And I believe that we, as technologists and on the technology side, have a responsibility to the business, to the customers. And that is to stop thinking technology and start understanding what are the problems that need to be solved from the customer's perspective. And we need to bridge that divide. So there's a huge chasm in the middle, and it is really important to bridge that divide. So we talked about, Francesco talked about, now we're getting faced with, billions of data points coming at us on a daily basis. We talk about the machine-to-machine or the human-to-machine challenges that we have today. And it is getting more complex. And, when I talk about BC Hydro 10 years ago, what's happening now is, billions of times much greater in terms of the challenges that face us. But those challenges are also opportunities as well. So there is a massive amount of data being generated out there. There are utilities out there that say, there is no solution out there. There are no tools out there, so I'm going to ignore it. But that's losing opportunity. So I believe it is the public-private partnerships that have to come together to start to really understand this information, eliminate the noise, and start to understand how do I get real, useful information, not only to start satisfying my customers' needs and start creating better opportunities, but to actually drive innovation as well. So there is an ability to drive innovation, but those two have to come together in order to be able to do that. So I have very strong views, not only from being on both sides, but from the technology perspective, that we have to embrace that. We have to stop thinking about what our goals and drivers are and start to think about what the business and the customer's drivers are, and then start to meet those challenges. So I heard you say listen. I think listening is hugely important.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.